And what's up? What's up? Welcome in. It is GC Live Thursday edition of the show, Thursday episode. We are, of course, brought to you by our good friend Clint Hammond of the Mortgage Network here in Columbia. Check out clintmortgagenetwork.com/Clint-Hammond, or you can just give him a call. Probably the easiest way to do it, 803-771-6933, or shoot him an email. That's chammond@mortgagenetwork.com. Clint and the fine folks at Mortgage Network are our primary presenting sponsor here on GC Live now, and never a better time to buy a house, never a better time to refinance. So give my buddy Clint a call, and I promise he can walk you through all the steps, whether you are a newbie, first-time home buyer, or a seasoned, home investor. He'll get you fixed up. So certainly appreciate Clint. Chris, we've sort of been on this Monday, Wednesday, Friday train. We did not have a show yesterday. I sort of strangled you into doing a show today because I was like, we've got to get on here and talk because, dadgum, man, we got to. There's been a lot that has happened. There wasn't much to talk about Monday. Well, then in the last couple of days, we've caught up. We thought this thing was over. We thought the staff was together. You always. I mean, this is college football, right? You're always a couple of hours away from potentially having to fill, a staff spot at any given time. But we kind of thought things had settled down. Then news breaks yesterday. Dez Kitchings to the Atlanta Falcons. It is confirmed today by the Falcons. It is made official by the Falcons today. So that's happening. And, man, I would say nothing short of a big loss for South Carolina. That's not to say they can't fill the spot, that they can't, get somebody else that's really good as well. But, we try not to sugarcoat it either. That's a loss for South Carolina. And, I would say, Chris, a situation where as happy as, I think Des Kitchings was to get the South Carolina job and to be in the SEC and to get back home, this was something where we had heard rumblings before about some other possible job openings and him that never quite maybe made it to the point of us, certainly mentioning it publicly or anything like that. Then, of course, he gets the raise during the sort of second round of second or third round, I guess, of updates to assistant contracts. And it's sort of settled in, but then he interviews with the Falcons this week, takes that job, and maybe just a situation there, man, where it was just too good of a spot to turn down.
Right. Yeah. And so I think there's a clear line to draw here on it. Because I know some people are saying, I even see one in the comments there about Beamer saying that there's a group of coaches that want to be here. So different situations sometimes, and this has happened at South Carolina in the past, and it's happened at other schools, and it's happened at other schools this year, where you see guys just trying to get out of somewhere. Whatever their situation is at the current school, they're trying to get out. They want to find another job. Not the case with Dez Kitchings here, right? Because, Dez Kitchings was not searching for some sort of out from South Carolina. The Falcons job came about. It's an NFL job. NFL jobs are getting increasingly appealing if it's the right type of situation for college coaches, because not only do you take recruiting out, but now with recruiting, there's the transfer portal. There's the name, image, likeness stuff that's coming down. It's really gotten complicated and getting more complicated. And so if this was just some random college offering Des Kitchings a job, I was even told specifically that it couldn't have been just any NFL job that would have lured him away from South Carolina. It had to be the right situation. So with the Falcons, obviously it's still, in the Southeast for Des Kitchings. It's the NFL, the highest level of football. And to Arthur Smith, the new head coach for the Falcons, Des Kitchings apparently has some connections. So it's not a deal where Des Kitchings was going to jump on the first offer that came his way. It came together, I think, quickly from what we understand, Wes. And I think it was just like you said, it was a situation that was hard to turn down, for a guy like him.
Yeah, and there are some other connections there, man. I was looking today. Dwayne Ledford, who I believe was at Louisville for the last couple of years as their OC, is now the Falcons' O-line coach. And if you go back, Ledford was at NC State from 2016 to 2018. Obviously, an overlap there with Dez, who was at NC State for like 8 years as running backs coach, and then also had some other roles, some other titles involved at various times there as well. So just lots of the fact that Southeast, as you said, NFL job, but multiple connections there and people that he trusts. It is hard. I mean, let's all put ourselves in that situation. Sometimes you get made an offer that's just too good, or too good of a situation even to turn down. So I believe that's the case here. Now, it does hurt South Carolina in that this was someone, Chris, that wasn't just, I would say not just a running backs coach. He was involved with other guys as far as recruits go, other positions, probably more so than even is kind of like required of you. Mm-hmm. And Chris, I would even say it is someone who kind of tried to go above and beyond to help out with relationships, because Dez is a guy who just knows a lot of people. He's a very good networker, knows a lot of coaches who have, prospects that are being recruited by South Carolina. So it's important now for Shane Beamer to go out. I think the running back spot, if you look at how you structure a modern day coaching staff, the running back coaching spot, man, this has got to be a recruiter. This has got to be a guy, not just who can, I would say, connect with the current running backs. There's some really good ones on campus right now, but has to be able to go out and recruit well, not just for that position, but for his territory, and can be like one of the primary top recruiters on this staff.
Yeah, and Dez did a great job of helping to hold things together in the transition. You got to remember, I mean, there was a period where Shane Beamer was obviously the head coach during the transition, and then you had some recruiting office people, and then you had a few coaches in that building. And so Dez did a tremendous job of holding things together. And he's a talented coach. When you look at his track record, he's a talented evaluator. He's a talented recruiter. And so those are traits that you're going to have to try to replace. And I think that's the key here, Wes. You can say that Dez Kitchings is a big loss for South Carolina because it is. I mean, we both are on the same page about that. But you can also say Shane Beamer can go out and still make a quality hire. I mean, the situation is what it is. Des Kitchings isn't on staff, so now where do you go? And so I think whether it's in recruiting in terms of talent to bring onto your team, or it's your coaching staff or your support staff, there's always a lot of focus on which guys don't come, right? Which guys are you not getting, which guys leave. The key to it all really is, because the show goes on, is who you get. So in recruiting, for instance, people are talking about Gunnar Stockton committing to Georgia just now. Gunnar Stockton is not in South Carolina's 22 class anymore. So that's a bummer for Gamecock fans. That's a bummer for the staff. The key here is which quarterback do they go get in the 2022 class? That's the important thing. They need to make it a good one. So, anytime we've seen situations in college football, we've seen situations at South Carolina where, sometimes you lose coaches, and it's important to replace those coaches with quality hires. If you don't, your program may slip. And so that's what it's been all about here for South Carolina, navigating all these different changes for Shane Beamer, whether it's guys that, new hires that he had to onboard at the beginning, or guys that he kept that ended up going to other situations. You've got to then just go out and hire good coaches. Auburn hired Tracy Rocker away from South Carolina, and then apparently he left, before he even got there. So they have to go hire a good new coach now. So Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, in terms of just going back to Dez, big loss, but you got to go out and make a good hire because that's an important hire for South Carolina, and I think it's going to be a job that will have some attractiveness for sure.
Well, and all right, so I know everybody's asking. Everybody wants to know what's the latest on the opening right now. And I do one thing I like about this podcast slash live show is, essentially that it gives us a platform, Chris, to go a little bit more behind the scenes on exactly how we have to operate, how trying to follow this search or searches, as has been the case. I mean, we've had we've had a head coaching search. We've now had we've had assistant coaching searches for the same spot multiple times in some cases now. And a not recruiting coordinator, but director of player personnel guy search. And now we have a running backs coach search. And so sometimes there are cases where it just moves so fast that there is just someone that the coach, in this case, Shane Beamer, already just has in mind. And maybe there's even like a backdoor deal or like a unofficial conversation, if you will, where it's like, hey man, if this spot ever opens, you're my first call. And there's maybe sort of like a little, well, hey man, I'd love to have that spot if it does open. Sometimes that happens, and sometimes it's very fast. Other times, when something like this happens, most of the time there is this influx of information where we're trying to find out, is it that the head coach is interested in this person, or is it just that this person is interested in that job? So in the coaching community, you have a lot of, oh, hey, this guy would be great for that spot. And then there's a little bit of buzz generated, right? But is that person actually on the head coach's list?
Right.
That is the hardest question, I feel like, to answer. And what we've found that Beamer tends to, unless the information is coming from the other end, and it happens to also be that Beamer is interested, Beamer tends to operate pretty quietly on this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of where we are right now, or where we were yesterday. You start trying to gather information, find out who is potentially in the mix. Now, when we throw out early names, a lot of times, unless it's one of these just quick hires, it is a situation where we maybe don't know. Is it just that the coach is interested in that opening? Is it that it's mutual? Or is it that in some cases it may be Beamer's trying to hire a guy away from a school, and maybe that coach maybe isn't interested. So there's all these different sides to this thing, Chris. And there have been some names that have floated out there already, but I would also, to be completely open and honest and transparent, I don't know yet if we know who's the guy that has that like all sides where it just fits interest yet.
Yeah. Yeah. And so some people even in the comments here are talking about Georgia Southern running back coach Chris Foster. And certainly there's some ties there. I don't know that things are advanced there. Is he someone that could be in the mix? I think certainly could be in the mix. And there's some staff ties there as well. Des Kitchings, obviously really respected in that building, including by Shane Beamer. And I've heard some chatter within the industry that Des Kitchings, thinks highly of Chris Foster, although they have not worked together. There's some ties there and some familiarity there. Chris Foster from the state of South Carolina, born and I think raised in the state as well. And also knows a couple of the current coaches on South Carolina's staff. He worked with defensive line coach Jimmy Lindsey at Georgia Southern in, I think, 2016. And he also worked with Justin Stepp at Appalachian State for 3 seasons from 2012 to 2014. So there is some familiarity. In a lot of ways, Chris Foster, checks off, a lot of the boxes and just being a strong developer. You go back and look at everywhere that he's been so far, really good track record, and also really good, recruiter, regarded as a really good recruiter and a really good guy. And so he has some similarities, I think, to Dez Kitchings in that regard. So Obviously, we're going to be tracking some other names. That's just one early. Jay Graham, Wes, going to Alabama. That was one that we knew when Shane Beamer was probably going to be the hire at South Carolina. Des Kitchings and Jay Graham were a couple guys at the running back position that we were really tracking there. And two more names that I saw come up in the comments. People are going to ask about Marcus Lattimore. Wes, I don't think we're on the same page. We're not sure at this point, just to level with everybody, if that may come up. I mean, it makes some sense, obviously, but we don't know yet. A lot of people are talking about Bobby Bentley. Don't see that happening. I don't think Bobby Bentley's returning to South Carolina in that capacity, and going to have a job. He's actually gonna have a job lined up, from my understanding as well. So,
yeah, and I don't get the talk. I mean, I've seen Bentley's name pop up, and I mean, you literally you can't basically let a coach go essentially when you get hired and then turn around and be like, oh, hey, by the way, now we want you. Like that's an awkward conversation. I feel like you can't just turn around and hire Bentley. If you had retained Bentley, that's one thing, but you can't be like, hey, we're going in another direction. And then, oh, hey, no, just kidding. It didn't work out. It's like if you break up with your girlfriend and it doesn't work out with your new girlfriend, and then you go back and are like, hey, I'm just kidding. Come, I want to hang out now.
Right.
I don't see how that's, these are people. Like, these are human beings. They aren't just names. I don't see how Bobby Bentley's not going to be like, oh yeah, sounds great. I'm going to rush back to Columbia now. That's just not how it works. So I see some people asking about E.J. Barthel. That's another one of those, one of the other categories here, Chris, would be sometimes you just start to connect the dots, right? And you say, who makes sense? And, he's someone, he is currently, I've written down a lot of these guys. He's currently the Panthers offensive assistant O-line and running backs coach. So someone obviously that has been there with Matt Rule, has been there with Marcus Satterfield, and would maybe sort of be at least want to keep an eye on just putting the pieces together. Not necessarily that we've heard that as far as information goes, but just makes sense. You look at a name we've seen thrown around, Jimmy Smith from Arkansas. He's someone that's from South Carolina, I think from Darlington, South Carolina. I believe would have some interest in the job if South Carolina pursues it. I didn't get the impression as of yesterday that it had progressed much there as far as there being something, much like you said, with Chris Foster. It's a name to watch, but not really under the impression that it's inevitable, with either of those guys. And maybe there's a guy that's out there that it's already sort of trending that direction, or maybe there's not. Maybe it just hasn't gotten to that point yet. So we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. We're trying to doing some digging on it throughout the day, last night, throughout this morning. Haven't uncovered anything that substantial quite yet, aside from some guys being in the mix. And like you said, man, it could very well be that behind the scenes, things have moved a lot more quickly than we've caught up to. And if that's the case, then we'll eventually catch up to it. It really has been fascinating covering all these different angles, whether the head coaching search, the different assistant coach departures and arrivals. They've all sort of been a little bit different, and I feel like, just again, leveling with people, we've been able to various degrees be on top or a little bit less on top, depending on how each of those have gone. But we'll continue sorting through it, working through it. Heck, who knows, man? Maybe by the end of the show, we got a little bit more. We'll just have to see.
Could be. Shout out to Jeffrey Hicklin. Appreciate the 5 spot there, buddy. Glad you made it in. Pretty real chance, y'all, that these shows are going to be a little bit earlier in the day, from now on. So I'd be on the lookout more around this noon time slot. I think that's probably more along the lines of what we'll be looking at moving forward. Obviously, you can always watch it later on, but you just miss the interactive aspect of things if you're watching it later on. So, anything more you have on this part, Chris, on the running backs coach deal, or thoughts on just that opening in general, or is that pretty much it on that?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it on that. Going to continue to dig in on these candidates or maybe some others. Wes, you and I have talked about sort of off air, trying to dig in on whether or not they some of these guys could be in the mix, and hopefully we'll get some clarity on that soon. You would anticipate that it will move pretty quickly, right? That Shane Beamer, given where the team is, in the midst of winter workouts, but meetings and recruiting and all those different types of things going on, you would anticipate that it'll move quickly, but not be in so much of a rush as to rush to hire.
Which it has been the MO, for Beamer, is that he's not going to rush things.
Yep.
He's going to go try to get his guy and then, go from there, which for better or for worse, that is how he is going to do things. And, I think you do at least respect that he has a approach and that he's going to stick to that and go from there. So, all right, Chris, as I put in the headline for today's show, we're a little bit, I don't want to say late on this, but we just haven't, with our timing, we could have talked about it a little bit earlier, but we have not had a show since the St. Francis duo, which, golly, man, it's interesting. That's the most maybe we've had, the most interest we've maybe had from people on this show in a particular recruit or two. I feel like in a while we were getting, hey, what's up with the St. Francis duo? What's up with the St. Francis duo? Over and over and over again.
Right.
So then you get your answer earlier this week. Both guys commit to South Carolina. Jason Brown commits, and then shortly after that, E.J. Jenkins announced his commitment as well. Talk about the most just known commitment ever. Once Jason Brown committed first, it was a foregone conclusion that E.J. Jenkins was going to announce his pledge as well. But something where I think, Chris, we knew there were positions that South Carolina needed to add help at. And quarterback, when this offseason first started, quarterback probably was not on the list. I remember, us talking about that. Then you lose Ryan Helinski and you lose Colin Hill. And then very quickly, quarterback becomes a spot where you had to look at bringing in either a JUCO guy or a transfer. So they bring in the transfer, Jason Brown. We'll go into E.J. Jenkins here in a second. But for those who are watching as opposed to listening, I'm going to pull up a clip here in a second of Jason Brown. But, Chris, your thoughts on the commitment of Jason Brown earlier this week?
Yeah, so, Jason Brown's a really interesting player because there's a lot of just natural arm talent. He's sort of, to me, Wes, he's sort of, is he a little raw? Yeah, I think so. And I don't put as much stock into, like, when I watch a quarterback, I'm not going to be as concerned about, well, what's his arm angle look like? Because now it is really in vogue and really seen as a great trait if you can make those off-platform throws. And, you see Patrick Mahomes out here throwing sidearm, underhand, behind his back, whatever it may be, all these different types of throws. So Jason Brown, a little bit more like unorthodox in terms of delivery, but he makes some throws on tape where you go, wow, that's a really impressive throw. So I think you nailed it, Wes, when you said that, you can't – the bottom line is you can't carry two scholarship quarterbacks, one of which is a true freshman with zero experience, the other which is going to be, a second-year player with very limited experience in Luke Doty, onto the roster. You just can't, as a coaching staff, feel great about that. So bring in another guy who has some experience at the college level, who has some arm talent and some ability, to come in and compete and see what happens. And at the bare minimum, add some depth to that room as a scholarship player. So I think, just looking over the film at Jason Brown, there's definitely some things to like there.
Well, I think, Chris, my question is, we're all always trying to, at least I consider it kind of part of our job. We're trying to set expectations, and there's always, I believe, going to be a little bit higher expectation for a guy coming in most of the time than it is maybe fair. I mean, you look at Jalen Brooks coming in, and I readily admit I was hyping up that acquisition and the fact that he was going to come in and be a guy who could help. And then what happens the very first practice, his teammates, his DBs are talking him up. And there's still time for Jalen Brooks. Don't get me wrong. I think when Jalen Brooks settles in this year and has a full offseason, he's going to help this football team. Now, to what level, we'll see. Here's the thing I struggle with. There's a lot of excitement about these kids. There's a lot of natural talent here, as you can see. There's obviously going to be a jump up for SEC ball. We know that. Let's not lump them together. They're separate people, separate positions, separate prospects. What are fair expectations for Jason Brown coming in? I think at the very least, yes, he's going to compete for the job at quarterback. You look at it, and there's a ton of ceiling to go here, right? Like big arm, big kid, athleticism. The other side of that, which you can make a case for, is also it's going to be a huge jump to SEC play.
Yeah.
So where are you at on fair expectations coming in for this kid?
Yeah, I think it's just what you said. I think that the baseline sort of expectation needs to be, and I'm not saying this is the ceiling, right? I agree with you. The ceiling is higher than this, but the baseline just needs to be come in, compete, be a guy that can add depth, be a guy that let's say he doesn't win the starting job, because I can't sit here and say, like, do I think Luke Doty probably has the best chance right now being the starter? Yes. But I don't know. I mean, they haven't gone through spring ball at all. I mean, there's just so many questions to answer. So let's say if Jason Brown does not end up being the starter, I think it's a fair expectation that if he needs to come in, that he can come in and give some quality snaps and maybe and play well. I don't think the expectation needs to be that he comes in day one, wins the job from the first snap in spring practice, and ends up being a star. Like, that doesn't need to be the expectation. I think tempering that a little bit. And one reason being because of that jump in competition. Like you see Brown on film, and some of the plays that he makes at this level are, that we're watching on film are going to be a lot more difficult. In the SEC, the windows are so much more tight, etc. Now, in theory, he'll still have, not in theory, in reality, still have E.J. Jenkins 6'8" to throw to, which can help with some of those tight windows. But I think that's the fair expectation, man, is for him to add some depth, and to come in and compete and be a guy that Mike can come in and help you play.
Yeah, and I mean, let's just go ahead and cliche it up, man. He can make all the throws, like you see that, and it's very obvious. The ball is coming out. It's coming out fast. He told me, I guess that was 2 days ago, he told me he can throw a ball 75 yards in the air. So the physical stuff, let's say it like this. Physically, he will transition to the SEC level. I'm not worried about that part. All you're really worried about and this is with anybody, the speed of the game, tighter windows, right? Your guys aren't as open. Sometimes you have to throw them open against some DBs. And it's obviously not the same as the NFL, where literally it's like nobody's open and you have to just throw in these super tiny windows. There are going to be open players at times in the college level, especially with the way offenses are now. But are there smaller windows? Is that pass rush getting to you a little bit quicker? Are those defensive ends? That may be the biggest difference for him, man. It's going to be the pass rushers when he's trying to maneuver around in the backfield and try to extend plays. The pass rushers at this level get on you much quicker. Now, I mean, freshman quarterbacks, they got to make the jump from high school ball to this. So everybody has to make the jump. I do think as a college football society or a football watching society, we do sometimes get a little too caught up in the physical traits for quarterbacks. That's not the most important thing for a quarterback. The most important things for a quarterback will be processing the information, will be accuracy, will be leadership ability in the huddle. The fact you can throw a ball far, to me, is pretty far down the list. But you do, I think you're already seeing just our little bit of time we've sort of heard from Jason Brown and getting to know him a little bit. There are some really nice intangibles here. There are some leadership qualities. Good kid, sounds like a worker. All those things play in, for me at least, when I'm evaluating a quarterback prospect.
Yeah, definitely. And we've seen there have been quarterbacks, one of the hardest positions to evaluate. I can't even count how many guys that we've even personally seen in camp over the years or watched film on, and they just have this unbelievable arm, the size. I mean, they already look like an NFL guy, as a senior in high school. But there's just some other things that just aren't there, and you see guys that maybe don't have as big arm talent, go on and succeed. Connor Shaw is the best quarterback in South Carolina history. Where would he rank on the arm strength, arm talent scale, Wes? I mean, he would be lower for sure. But he had a lot of other qualities that just made him a great football player. Now, that's not to down. If you've got elite arm strength, you'd much rather have that than not. But a lot of the other things are very, very important, when you're evaluating quarterback prospects. It's important to have those things.
No doubt. All right, let's go into E.J. Jenkins. First things first, 6'8". That's the first thing anybody's going to mention or notice about the kid. This is my first time actually completely going through his entire film. I've glanced at it. I've looked at it. Reportedly, supposedly, the word on the street is he's been timed as a 4.5 in the 40-yard dash. He's up to about 235, 240 pounds. The real question here, Chris, at least for me, is just going to be that does he separate against SEC defensive backs? And that's not to say that he will not. That's generally with these bigger receivers, and he's one of the biggest, that we've seen. Can they create separation against SEC defensive backs? And then if they struggle with that, can they otherwise maneuver their body well enough to where they're going to make a play, even if they're not, quote unquote, open? Sort of, Alshon Jeffrey was so thick, was so good at going up and getting the football, had such good ball skills that he was open even when he was not open.
Yeah, right.
Can E.J. Jenkins be that for South Carolina? So I don't know. I'll ask you the same way. First of all, what's your eval of E.J. Jenkins, and what are your expectations?
Well, this kid on film, really jumps out. And so now, fully bearing in mind that, again, I'll go back to this, the transition, SEC competition, these DBs with the length and the skill, the speed that they have, it's going to be more difficult for Jenkins than what you see here. But that said, what you want to see with somebody of his size and athleticism at the receiver position at the level of competition he's playing on film is dominance. And he's a man among boys at this level, with his size. He's not a big plodding receiver. He can actually run. But even more than that, he just uses his height, his length, his ball skills just to dominate guys. And he wins a ton of one-on-one battles. So that's what you look for on film. You do consider the competition level, but if he was out here struggling to get open against this competition, or if he wasn't winning his one-on-one battles, then you would be concerned. But he certainly does that. So I think, when you look at the upside of Jenkins, there's a lot there. I think he's one of the more intriguing guys on this entire roster going into the 2021 season for me.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this receiver battle plays out, because you all of a sudden you obviously you lose Shi Smith. By the way, shout out to Shi Smith. He's He is the next in line of people who are former Gamecocks that go to the Senior Bowl and just show out. That it seems to be like a yearly occurrence now. You had Javon Kinlaw last year. You had Debo Samuel the year before. That's just what happens. Somebody from South Carolina goes out there and is a stud. I did see a tweet. I think it's from Joe Person, former sports reporter at the State, now is covering the Panthers, saying maybe Shai's day is done. Hope that's not the case, but I think probably was able to raise his stock already. So point being, we know South Carolina is going to lose Shi Smith. We know that they're going to miss Shi Smith. You look at some of the additions, though, Amarian Brown coming in, he's someone I tend to think, honestly, among the transfers for myself, he might be the most sure thing that I just feel 100% confident that Amarian Brown is going to make an impact on this team next year. Now, you look at E.J. Jenkins, and he's the one where I'd say it like this, Chris. I'm not as positive that he is definitely going to make an impact, but so the floor is not quite as high, but the ceiling where if this guy comes in and it just clicks, then there's the potential there for this guy to be like South Carolina's leading receiver, basically. So, you have a lot of potential in this group. You have more potential to work with than, maybe you have before you get Ortre Smith back, it appears. Jalen Brooks has another year. You look at the freshmen from this past year, guys like Jakari Caldwell, Rico Powers, I think there's just some true, at least, competition at this position now.
Yeah, there is. I think what they're missing is just, who's the guy? Who's the guy you can count on? You're not really sure about that. Last season, we came into last year, A, knowing that receiver was going to be a big question mark and quite frankly could have been a struggle, which played out. But B, we at least knew that it's going to be Shi Smith's show. Like, he's going to be the top guy. Can he step up and be more consistent? And he was. I mean, he was really, really good last year. And part of that was the amount of targets he did get. But he was the only real receiving threat from that receiving core on a consistent basis, game to game. And he still got the ball. He still made plays. He won one-on-ones. He did a really good job. And that's certainly projecting now to the NFL level, at least in the lead up to the draft. So that's the biggest thing that they're missing. And I think more than that, Wes, there's still questions about how good or any of these guys on this roster can one or two of them emerge and prove to be, SEC consistent players against the competition that South Carolina is going to face. And that's still a very legitimate question, so I think you go into this season with maybe even more questions than we've seen at this position, even in the last few years, which is significant. But I think if you do find a silver lining in it is that they do have some guys that have some talent, right? And for a variety of reasons, it hasn't manifested itself or they're new additions to the program. There are some guys, but they're going to have to find out who they are quickly and get some production from them.
Well, and I think very important that you get some semblance of a full spring practice and some semblance of actually being able to get these guys together and work out, within this scheme, this new scheme that everybody's going to be learning. And they're once again learning a new scheme, which is never ideal, man. I do hate that for the kids. And, for the guys that have been here for a while on offense, you're having to just completely scrap what you were doing again, learn new terminology, all this stuff. So we'll see how all that plays out. But plenty of time to talk about that all off season. So I'm sure we'll get tired of talking about receivers again. But I've never, at least I feel like going into last off season, Chris, we could make pretty good predictions about what the depth chart might look like at receiver. Honestly, right now, it would be very hard to try to project an actual depth chart because it's truly 100% going to depend on who takes advantage of this opportunity and just steps up and grabs it. Is it one of the returning freshmen? Is it a Jalen Brooks? Is it a healthy Ortre Smith? Is it a newbie transfer? Is it a guy like Omega Blake, or Sam Reynolds? Who just takes advantage of the opportunity and grabs it? Only time will tell that. So, all right, final couple of things here. Greg Adkins, it got lost in the shuffle, I think, with everything else going on. Officially announced, officially introduced. He's been announced as South Carolina's offensive line coach. That was Wednesday, sort of morning into afternoon. Shane Beamer spoke. Greg Adkins spoke. I tell you, man, I like this guy. And he's got an old school vibe to him. He's been in the game a while. He's been at Georgia before. He's been at Tennessee before. He was at his alma mater most recently. He's got an old school coach vibe, but he also has some newer school tendencies in that he kept talking about the relationships with the guys, about treating the guys like their family, about loving his players, stuff like that. So to me, it was old school as far as how you're going to try to develop a guy and technique and experience and stuff like that. But it wasn't so much into we just have to be a you-know-what and just ride these kids to death and be so hard on them that they hate their coach, but they respect their coach. It was very new school as far as that approach. So I didn't, frankly, I was sort of just neutral on the hire at first as I was learning more information. After listening to Adkins talk yesterday, the more information we've learned about what he did at Marshall, the experience, I think this is a good fit for South Carolina.
I do think it's a good fit. And, some of the things he's worked with Luke Day a lot at Marshall, obviously strength coach at South Carolina. They had some carryover. My understanding is those two got pretty close at Marshall. And Greg Adkins actually said something in his press conference. And I was like, that phrase sounds familiar. I couldn't figure out where it was from. It was something that Luke Day said in his press conference. It was basically the line about football being a game where you're trying to move somebody where they don't want to go. And that's what it comes down to. So Adkins said that. It was also said in Luke Day's press conference. And, this is a guy, it's long been the book on Greg Adkins that, he is a guy that's very much a player's coach. And when I say that, that doesn't mean a pushover or anything like that. It just means that he's a guy that players have a really, really good relationship with. You can tell that he's a people person, him talking about his children during the press conference and just developing the player. That's important to him. And really it fits the vibe, Wes, of sort of stylistically of what Shane Beamer wants out of his coaching staff. Very relationship driven, a lot of talk about, family and love and culture and things like that. I think some of these hires are really fitting into that mold. But beyond that, Adkins has a good track record from a recruiting standpoint. He's got last year was his 30th year of experience, so very, very experienced. And Wes also, has had some really good offensive lines. Like you look at his offensive lines at Marshall last season, it was one of the best in the country. Actually, PFF ranked it in terms of pass blocking efficiently. It's fourth in the country. It's better than different competition level, but that was better than Alabama, Clemson, Georgia. I mean, they had really good numbers there. He had two of the top rated run blockers in the country on his offensive line, and another one that was top 20 in a different metric by PFF. So really good numbers, throughout his career for Greg Adkins, and stylistically, I think fits with what they want.
I thought it was interesting. First of all, the emotion he showed, when talking about his kids, and the sort of gratitude I think he has for this opportunity to get to South Carolina. He said his jaw dropped, or his chin dropped, I think was the way he said it when he saw this facility. A common theme we've seen with recruits, Chris, is also that they don't realize what South Carolina has until they actually see it in person for themselves and they see the facility. That's been missing in the recruiting process now for almost a year because the recruiting shut down, but that's another story for another day. But then Chris, sort of the approach, and I'm trying to find it so I give the 4 correct terms. It's kind of like, and he may have mentioned it like this. I can't remember if he said this or where I got this from, but I do know that he was asked about his points of emphasis on coaching an offensive lineman. And it was an interesting answer because coaches do like to talk about details and attention to detail. But it's also sort of with doing anything, it's sort of like if you're trying to fix a golf swing or you're trying to fix a baseball swing. You can get so caught up in those details that you just completely paralyze yourself as far as being able to process what you're trying to do, right? Well, that's the case with anything athletically when you're trying to make your body do something that it's not naturally doing. Well, he sort of described it like, yes, you want attention to detail, but there are also 4 main points of emphasis. And then he said if he's evaluating a guy and he then asks a player to evaluate his own film, and he says, well, did you do this? Did you do this? It normally comes down to these 4, what would you call them? 4 tenets of success for him, maybe. And those are, as an offensive lineman, your get off. So how quickly you get off the line of scrimmage when the ball is snapped, and that you do it with the proper timing to the rest of your, to your 4 teammates. Your strike, which is your physical, like using your hands, actually firing off your hips and striking your opponent. Your body position, which is the actual angle that you're striking them from. And then your finish, which is obviously how you finish the block. You don't just block them and sort of let them go, which is kind of difficult to do because defensive linemen are trying to break free from your block. But it was interesting to hear a veteran coach also sort of acknowledge, like, yes, the details are important, but I took that as like we don't want to lose sight of the forest because we're so focused on the trees type thing. Like if you do these 4 things, sometimes you may get there a little differently than somebody else, but clearly his guys have probably been pretty good at doing these 4 things with as successful as his lines have been, at Marshall.
Right. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, and someone asked in Facebook comments, Patrick Bowen, how is Greg Adkins as a developer? I mean, yeah, he's coached tons of NFL guys and multiple stops, and some of his guys at Marshall from last season are probably going to have that opportunity. But you just look at, the way that they developed during their careers, what they were last season, a pretty successful offensive season for Marshall, pretty successful season overall. It's typically been a very good program as it was under Doc Holliday. Again, running through those numbers, I mean, really good pass blocking numbers last year. Wes, I actually texted you this earlier.
I was going to say, you need to share this.
Yeah, so one of his offensive linemen, I think there are 2 that were really, really good, and I think it was Kane Madden. Might have been Alex Millette, but I think it was Kane Madden. I mean, according to PFF, did not give up a sack or even a pass rush pressure all year. And so that was obviously, really, really good. Now, nobody get mad if South Carolina does not, only gives up. They gave up 12 sacks in 10 games. So that's a high bar. That probably won't happen in the SEC, 12 sacks in a whole year. But yeah, I mean, you just look back at his track record over his coaching career, and he's been a part of some really good offenses, some really good offensive lines, a lot of different styles, that he's coached in.
And I think he's excited to be back in the SEC, man. I know sometimes people sort of say that's overplayed, but I've talked to enough coaches that have said, once you get to the SEC, you don't want to leave, and unless you're maybe going to the NFL or something. So I think that's part of the sort of emotion you saw and the gratitude you saw for him accepting this job and then talking about it yesterday. But he's a football guy, man. I mean, you heard him. He said basically, I could talk about this for hours, and was talking about how excited. I mean, I can imagine those offensive guys just sitting down, sort of putting together this scheme. You talk about somebody, you and I are very familiar with, like Eric Kimry, just getting to throw ideas up on the board in there. this is what these football heads on the offensive side love to do. So I'm sure there was some full on X's and O's nerding out in the offensive staff room. It sounded like from what Beamer and Greg Adkins were both saying yesterday.
Nerding out, yeah, that's a good way to put it. No, I mean he definitely football guy. You know, like you said, interesting mix of sort of old school and new school mentality with Adkins, and a guy that I think players really like, and I think is going to be good for that offensive line group. I think they'll like Greg Adkins and take to him well, but also a guy that has a good, coaching reputation, but just a good fit, with how Shane Beamer structured his staff, I believe.
Jackie asked if we liked the new schedule video. I thought that was awesome. And the fact that they gave some of these wonderful folks who are on the front lines of COVID-19 some season tickets for free. I think that was an awesome way to sort of reward those folks, but also maybe let everybody know a little bit about what those folks are doing as far as helping us all out and hopefully getting this vaccine spread far and wide so that we can have real sports seasons coming up with actual fans. Because, man, that's the other thing. Obviously, sports is not near the most important thing when it comes to the pandemic, but it will be awesome to see an actual atmosphere in a game again, hopefully in a not too distant future. And I think the path to that is through vaccination. So, all right, dude, final couple things. I guess we'll talk about the fact that, and we won't spend much time on it, but Gunnar Stockton does commit to Georgia. He made that official here during the show, or I think right when the show was starting. Maybe a surprise to some that it was Georgia and not Auburn. Not a surprise, I think, to anyone. There was maybe a sense or a hope that South Carolina would still be in it after he decommitted, but those who read Chad Simmons reporting, Chad Simmons is as good as anybody on the planet at covering recruiting in his territories and has been all over the Gunnar Stockton deal. When Chad put out his first article after Gunnar had decommitted, I knew instantly. I was like, okay, Gunnar Stockton's not going to go to South Carolina, because the way Chad wrote it up, it completely sort of neglected South Carolina having any chance. Well, when Chad does that, there's a reason for it. So even if Gunnar hasn't really been talking publicly, honestly, as soon as Bobo left, this sort of went out of South Carolina's favor completely.
Yeah.
Georgia gets him. Nice get for them, Chris. Now, as you said, important for South Carolina to move forward and go find their guy for the class of 2022.
Yeah, and I know everybody's wondering who that may be. We don't know yet. I mean, obviously they've engaged with some 2022 targets, some of that we've covered on the site on Gamecock Central. But in terms of being able to point to, hey, it's this guy, that hasn't happened yet. It will at some point. And here's another key factor, Wes. I mean, when does in-person recruiting reopen? We don't know that yet. It looks like that could happen this summer. So maybe that means camps. Maybe that means visits restart. And if so, I think we'll know a lot more then, because it's going to be critical for them to be able to, identify a pool of guys, which they're already working on, and then sort of narrow that down. Quarterbacks like to commit early. They tend to commit early. But it's a little bit too early in the new staff transition to know, where this thing may go.
Yeah, and I got a feeling, Chris, maybe in the next couple of months, though, it'll start to become pretty clear, because as you said, it is early. Like, or the quarterbacks do go early. They go earlier than about any other position. Now, how much has that been affected? What's something else we know about quarterbacks? Coaches love to work with their future quarterback in person, right? They want to have them in camp. They want to see what they're like. They want to see what they're about. They want to see how they work with other people. Camp setting is generally how you do that. Or you go to their game, you go to their practice, you watch a full game, you sort of get a sense for those intangibles. You go hang out with their high school coach maybe and get a sense for what type of kid the guy is. all that has been taken away. So how much does that maybe affect quarterbacks, maybe even more than other positions, just because it's such an intangible oriented position. So I'll be curious to see. I imagine these coaches are having to just sort of roll the dice and offer kids anyway, but we'll see what happens. Are there some late bloomers that pop up? Are there some kids that get dropped later on because they don't end up being as good as maybe they appeared to be on film? I think all those are factors. What really matters is at the end of the day is about 11 months from now, 11 or 10 and a half months from now, that South Carolina signs a really nice quarterback prospect for the class of 2022. And as much as fans were upset when Gunnar Stockton decommitted, it actually is outstanding for South Carolina that it happened now. If you could have absolutely destroyed their chance at getting a top quarterback if South Carolina was sort of not really in it, but gets drug along, and then 8 months from now, Gunnar Stockton decommits and commits to Georgia, then you have no chance. At least if it was going to happen, you wanted for it to go ahead and happen now, and then you move forward with some guys maybe that Marcus Satterfield wants to go out and target for that spot. So, all right, Chris, what can these Gamecock fans expect on GamecockCentral.com the rest of the week, you think?
Well, obviously, the main thing is we're going to be continuing to track the running backs coach opening, and maybe that will finally actually finish off the staff. But we're going to continue tracking that. So as soon as we have some news on that, any news notes or whether a hire's made, we'll have that on GamecockCentral.com and just continue tracking all that. And obviously, next week, Wes, the late signing period on next Wednesday. And so there'll be some activity leading up to that. Only 3 spots left in this recruiting class now. So where do those spots go? What happens? We'll just have to see. So we'll continue tracking that.
Hey, is that next week? I mean, it is hard to believe because it snuck up on us. Not a lot of hype for the thing, but we'll see if South Carolina adds a couple of guys late. We'll, of course, be on top of that on GamecockCentral.com. That's going to do it for today's show. Shout out to the Gamecocks men's basketball team. Hammering Georgia yesterday. That's like, I don't know, it feels like the 100th time in a row that they've beaten Georgia in basketball. So shout out to them. Great game, great bounce back from 3 straight losses. Shout out to the women who have Mississippi State later on today. That's going to do it for Chris. I'm Wes. If you missed the show, you can always go back and start from the beginning. And also, we'll have the audio of the show up on all the major podcast platforms here shortly. Appreciate the time, appreciate the support, and we'll